But thank you again for having me. I'm really happy to have the opportunity to tell all of you a little bit about my experience, sort of shifting from doing research in school to like what it looks like in the work world. And so I've organized my talk to have a few sections. And the first one is just a little bit about me. I think Zoom can make everything a bit impersonal. So I wanted to give you just a bit of a sense of where I come from and sort of my career trajectory. And then I'll talk about the organization that I work for, which is Policywise for Children and Families. What is it that we do, how we do it, and in particular, the kinds of research skills that we use, just to kind of give you a sense of what it looks like in real life. And then get a little bit more specific about what it looks like to translate your research skills to the job environment and what kind of jobs can you get, and then how do you use the skills that you're learning now in an everyday work way. All right. So first, a little bit about me. I grew up in Burlington, Ontario, which is near Toronto. It's on Lake Ontario, and by all accounts, I was a pretty happy kid and smiled all the time. My nickname was Guy Smiley, if anyone's a Sesame Street fan. Played a lot of soccer and a lot of hockey, but somehow I couldn't find a picture of that. As close as I got was a picture of me roller skating at one of my birthday parties. I'm also a third generation curly haired redhead, which is an important part of my identity too. And I think one important point I wanted to make is that my career path has not been a really straight, direct, clear one. Often didn't know exactly what I wanted my next step to be, but over time figured out I could learn a little bit from each step, each job I had, and kind of figure out what I liked, what I was good at, what I didn't like, what I was less good at. And so kind of taking those many little steps, I've ended up kind of where I am here today. And so I like to say to people who are just starting out, not to feel like you have to know exactly what it is where you want to end up in 15 years. So for example, for myself, I didn't start out in the social sciences and humanities. So even though I ended up getting a PhD in communications, my undergrad was in physics and majored in physics, minored in math. And then after university was really missing writing and communications kind of work, because I really also enjoyed that. Took a few courses in university. So I went back to college and got a journalism diploma. And then during that experience, I was lucky enough to intern at Quirks and Quarks, which is a CBC radio show that's focused on science. And while I was there, kind of had an interest in learning, like, how is science communicated? How is it understood by people? How do ordinary folks like you and I, become involved in sort of science conversations and science decision making? And so the folks I worked with at Quirks and Quarks connected me to a professor at University of Calgary named Edna Einstedel, and I'm not sure if she was maybe going to be here today, so I'm not actually sure if she did end up coming, but I connected with her, and that was sort of what led me to move to Calgary 20 years ago. It's hard to believe, but 20 years ago. And so I came to do my master's with Edna with the thought that I would come for 2 years and then move back home. But 20 years later, and I never left, collected a PhD along the way and a family along the way. So I have a picture there of our family at the very beginnings of COVID, one of those portraits that were going around. It's my husband and my daughter and my three-legged dog. So that's a little bit kind of about me, and a very, very quick story of kind of how I got to where I am today. And so I'll switch now to talking a little bit about the organization I work for, which is called Policywise for Children and Families. And so it's a nonprofit organization, as Maria said, and the focus of our work is, in general, improving the well-being of children, families, and communities. And the tagline that's often used on our website is that we connect people with evidence. But what does that really mean? On our website, we talk about that we do research, data analytics, and evaluation services for government, for nonprofit organizations, and foundations. But I think, trying to simplify it a little bit or make the language a little clearer, I would say, in other words, what Policywise does is it connects people with the information they need to solve problems and improve lives. So what that looks like for us is that we might we might collect information maybe in the academic literature and the gray literature. We might collect and synthesize and analyze information that exists and share that with others. If the information we need does not exist, we will go out and collect our own data and do our own analysis. And then we also focus on what we like knowledge mobilization. And so getting the information and knowledge to the right people who can make decisions or who have influence on sort of changing the state of how things are. And I thought it would be good to start off with a couple of examples of what does our work actually look like. So I'm going to talk about two examples kind of at a high level here. And then later on in the presentation, I'm going to talk about a couple of other examples in a little bit more detail to kind of give you the on the ground feel. But first example of the kind of work that we do is we have worked with the government of Alberta, so Alberta Justice and the Solicitor General, and we're working with youth correction staff to implement more trauma-informed practices in young offender centers. So trauma-informed practices, some of you may or may not be familiar with it, but we know that many youth, many people in general, have experienced trauma in their life. It could be physical abuse, could be emotional abuse, many kinds of trauma. And so that experience has sort of changed people into when they're in situations where they might have a fear response, or they might go directly into fight or flight in situations where they have a sense that there could be some conflict. And so trauma-informed practices are really like, what are ways that we can act with other people that really acknowledges that they may have experienced trauma, and so act with them in a way that makes them feel safe, that they have support, and more of a healing kind of focus. So you can imagine in a youth corrections center, there are many practices that may not support feelings of safety and support. So the Alberta Justice was really interested in understanding how they could have their youth correction staff learn more about what trauma-informed practices are, and then be able to implement some of the best practices that have already have evidence showing that they work well. So what the work that we have done for them is to, first of all, look through all of the academic literature and start to understand what are the best practices around trauma-informed practice, and then take that information and translate it into a training program. So we did work with some professors at U of A as well, to put together how can we translate these best practices into what that could look like for corrections officers? What is it they could do in their interactions with youth that would be more trauma informed and really support the youth that they're working with? And so we also then evaluated the implementation of those new practices. So finding out, how well is it working? What is working about it? What is not? How could we improve the training and improve communication? So this project is still in progress. We've just done a series of interviews and focus groups with the correction staff to kind of tell us how it's going. And we're doing the analysis to sort of share back with Alberta Justice. So that's one example of kind of how we're really integrating that research with on the ground practice. And the second project I'll talk about here is with Alberta Health. They have developed a group of integrated youth hubs. So the idea, Alberta Health is funding the creation of integrated service delivery for youth who may have mental health concerns. So we worked with Alberta Health to develop the concept of what this youth hub could look like. Started with 2 pilot sites in the province to sort of look at, okay, how do you create this youth hub so that it meets the needs of the individual communities, and then how do you implement it, get it going, and then how do you scale it up? So the kinds of research we did were to understand, okay, what is it that each successful hub has to have? What are the required components? So for what it turned out, things like you need to have youth and family engagement from the get-go, because you need to know what the needs are in the community in order to produce a hub that's actually you know, fits the needs that are there and can provide the services that are actually most needed. And, you know, another one that just came to me is it also, we learned that what integration means, so we might have health services provided in a hub, we might have social workers, other social services, you know, a youth space to hang out, that all of those services that are provided in the hub need to be integrated beyond just being in the same place. So they need to have referral services, maybe they share client data, that kind of thing. So anyways, that's a kind of a high level look at that. So what's happened with that project is started with the 2 pilot sites, really put the practice or the concept of this integrated hub into practice, learned from it, and then this year it is scaled up to 13 sites across the province. And we are working with each of those 13 sites. We've hired what we call implementation coaches, and their job is really to work with the communities to help them implement the hub to the best of their abilities and what fits the community the best, and kind of provide them with feedback along the way. So those are kind of 2 different examples of sort of the type of work we do, how we support child well-being and youth well-being. And I wanted to talk just a little bit about, you know, our approach to research. So how can I connect what we're doing with maybe what you're learning in school about research? And what I think is special about our approach to research, kind of identified 3 aspects that I think are really important to us having success in what we do. And the first is that we are utilization focused. So what that means is the research and evaluation work that we do, we design it and plan it so that what we produce can be directly and immediately used by the sponsors of the work. So I think, for example, the work with Alberta Justice, with the youth corrections officers, is that, you know, ideally our results from our evaluation of how it's being implemented, we are feeding that right back into their management in leadership groups, so that the work can then, they can just try their next iteration of training and kind of like continue the work directly. And then we're also very context specific. So we integrate kind of the unique conditions of each of our projects, what they're working within, who is there, what stakeholders are involved, what's important about the context. And we're also very collaborative. So we work with the project sponsors, whether it's Alberta Health, or it might be Canadian Mental Health Association or United Way, and then other stakeholders that are important to the work. In our Youth Hubs project, Alberta Health was directly involved, but we also involved the service providers at the hubs. We involved the youth and families within the communities in a regular, ongoing way to, you know, get their feedback so that we could adapt and build the hubs and improve the hubs based on what kind of feedback they were giving us. Yeah. And so what kind of jobs are there at Policywise? We're a small organization, but we have really intentionally tried to set up a way to have kind of career advancement within the organization. We have a staff, I believe, of about 25 people. And we have some roles that are focused specifically on research. So I've shown on the screen here kind of a trajectory of, from a research evaluation associate to project lead to project manager. So I'll talk just briefly about each one of those, but they're built in a way so you can start in one, gain experience, and then move to the next. So for the research and evaluation associates, that position is aimed at people who are recently coming out of school, maybe have a little bit of work experience in the research area. We do look for people who have a master's degree. That's kind of the education level that we're looking at. And so obviously, research skills are essential to this position, so we're looking for people who have experience writing literature reviews and reports, maybe environmental scans. We look for people who might have qualitative research skills, so that might be doing interview protocol development, conducting interviews. I don't know if you've talked about doing coding of qualitative data, but organizing and analyzing interview data. We also have some folks on our team with quantitative research skills, so that's more large-scale survey development and analysis, that kind of thing. But I think it's important to talk about that that's not really the only thing we look for when we're hiring research and evaluation associates, or the REAs. We've been working with our team to develop like a competency list for REAs, so that, because they're often wondering like, what skills do I need to do my job better? And so we have 3 sort of competencies that we are looking for besides those basic research skills. So one is, we call it strategic thinking, but really to have critical thinking skills, being able to analyze situations, be able to understand like the mechanisms of maybe how and why things work. That's a general skill that's really important. And also being collaborative. I think sometimes research can be presented as a solitary thing, but I believe many of you are having experience doing research as a team, but it's a different kind of practice, and having teammates who are collaborative and who are doing their work and knowing how it impacts the rest of their team and really trying to be supportive of their team members. That's a big that's a competency that we really look for and try to nurture in our research and evaluation associates. And then the last one is, we call it generative, but in essence, we really look for people who are innovative and have new ideas, can think about different solutions to problems, maybe come up with like new ways of collecting data about problems that we're investigating, but really looking for people who can take a situation but be able to look through it through different lenses at it and then come up with kind of new ideas. And I think it's kind of nice to know that like those kinds of skills, I think, are the ones that you've probably been gaining over your undergrad time in undergrad too, but they are ones that really I find out in the work world are just as essential as the basic research methods and skills. And so the project lead position is really looks for the same skill set as our research and evaluation associate, but having more expertise and kind of a little more sophistication. So taking on project management skills as well. So being able to do the research, but also being able to do detailed work plans, be able to produce quality deliverables, on time, on budget, all those things we hear about with project management. So it's a nice way to kind of build on those research and evaluation associate experiences, but then kind of go to that next level of leadership. And then following that, we have a project manager role. So similar to the project lead, but really managing much more complex projects. So there might be multiple sponsors for a project that we're working on. There might be I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 different data collection types. So you're looking after doing interviews, maybe and surveys, you might be observing community events. And so putting all of those things together and managing, you know, maybe opposing stakeholders that might be involved in your project. So kind of that stakeholder engagement involvement piece becomes more part of the role as you move into the project manager role. And then I thought those are the really research-focused roles, but we also have more communication-focused roles, so tangential to doing the research itself. I've put asterisks beside these titles. We are in the midst of a reorganization right now, so I don't know what the titles are going to be in the end, but the kinds of roles that we're looking to produce are around being a communications lead or a knowledge mobilization specialist. So in these roles, you're not directly undertaking research, but you need to have an understanding of the research process. What are the stages, how it works, you know, the child and family well-being issues that might be being explored. You have to have an understanding of that, being able to kind of read the academic literature so you know what the projects are about. And then really the skills that these people bring are the ability to translate complex ideas into more digestible pieces of communication that can be shared with different groups outside of the project, you know, the general public as well, and have those, have the messages be memorable and understandable. So we do have a majority of research roles, but we also have some roles that are really communications focused or just, you know, knowledge focused. And then I thought I would end the last part of my talk is just giving a few examples of projects that I'm leading at Policywise, and just give you a sense of what the projects are about and the kinds of research methods that we might be using, so you can kind of see the things that you've been learning, what they might look like translated into a project. The first example is a project that we're working on with the Canadian Mental Health Association and the Alberta division of Canadian Mental Health Association. And they are running a project called the Rural Mental Health Project. And the objectives of this work is that they would like to train community members in rural communities in Alberta, so up to 150 community members in different rural communities, to be what they call community animators. So people who can work in their communities to develop mental health capacity within their communities. And the project came about because in rural communities there is often a lack of direct mental health services, and there's not always a way to bring a lot more services to rural and remote communities because the populations are so small. So this project is kind of taking a different look at mental health and saying, okay, what strengths are already in our rural communities that we can build on to kind of build our capacity, and at that sort of prevention, early intervention lens of mental health, like how do we strengthen our community so that there's a less need for services in the long run? Kind of a recognition that it's likely that more, you know, direct medical services may not be coming in the near future. And so the project is first and foremost about training community members so that they can do community development type work. So training them how to engage with community members, how to facilitate meetings and come up with plans and projects. And then the second piece of the work is building a virtual provincial network. So we're going to have, like, they have these animators in these communities all across the province, kind of in rural areas. So they wanted to build a way to connect those animators with each other so that they could feel like they're not alone doing this work, feel inspired to share their experiences, share resources and information that they've come across, and hopefully even collaborate with each other. So that's the CMHA, that's the project that they are conducting. And then our role as Policywise is to really take a developmental approach to evaluation. So to understand and improve the design and implementation of the project. So big scope, but because this is a new way of working for CMHA, they really wanted to have like a learning, an adaptive learning approach. So developmental evaluation is essentially evaluators such as myself and my team. We are almost embedded as a team member within the project team that's running this project. So we would attend team meetings. We are kind of part of the team, if you will. And so we've been working on this project since the beginning of 2019, and goes through to the end of 2021, and actually you've just found out that there'll be another 3 years of funding after that. So it's a very long-term project. And I thought I'd talk a little bit about you know, kind of what we focused on research-wise last year and this year, and what's coming next. And then just give you a sense of how do we then explore those topics? What kind of data collection methods did we use and stuff like that? So in the first year of the project, we were really focused on training these community animators. So supporting the team to develop their training curriculum, and then to attend the trainings and provide recommendations for how they could adapt the training, refine it, and improve it over time. And then a little bit about how do you now, you've trained all these folks, how do you build a virtual network that connects them? And then this year, we're really getting more deeply into the, what does this virtual network look like? How is it emerging? How is it being useful to people? How could it be more useful? That kind of thing. And then next year, we're hoping to look at, you know, how do we actually grow and expand this network and then build some sense of sustainability. They've been doing all this work training animators. They're trying to connect them. What does it look like to establish something that they can use even well beyond when the project funding ends? So in the first year, in 2019, when we were focused on the training, the kinds of data we were collecting, we attended the planning meetings for the training development. We did a little bit of lit review around the different, around community development, mental health promotion, to help support them with what best practices are. And then I think we attended, I want to say 6 different pilot trainings. So we would attend a training, we'd take observations, so we'd have particular things we were looking for, and then we surveyed the animators that attended the training. So what worked well for them, what didn't, what was confusing, what else do they wish they could have learned, all those sorts of questions. And then we put that information together, and after each training provide analysis and then considerations to CMHA, like, hey, this worked well, you know, maybe consider doing this differently. And then they would take that and work further on the training, adapt it, and then we would do the whole cycle again. So we went through that kind of 6 times. And then this year, we're focused more on the network aspect of what's going on. So we're doing a lot of interviews, semi-structured interviews with animators to have them tell us, like, how is this training, how did the training help you to work in your community? What are you actually doing with people in the community to develop mental health capacity? What does that actually look like? What successes are you having? You know, what supports do you need? All of those kinds of things. So we're in the middle of doing that analysis right now. And then next year, we're going to be focused more on the network and our research approaches will shift again. We will probably be doing some analysis of the website that they've developed and the social media sources that they use. Like, how are people connecting? How much traffic are they seeing on each of these modes of interaction? What kinds of interactions are they seeing there? That kind of thing. Yeah, and then I will just talk a little bit about a second example, and then we can I can open it up to questions. It's so strange not to be able to see your faces, so I'm hoping that feel free to ask any clarification questions when we're done. But the second example that I wanted to talk about is a project that's just getting underway with United Way of Calgary and area. And so what we've been asked to do for them is to conduct a needs assessment on child and youth well-being in Calgary. So basically, like, what are the domains of well-being? What's working well in Calgary in those domains? What's not working so well? Where are the gaps that need to be filled? And the reason we're doing this work is that United Way is looking to launch a long-term, like 5 to 10-year prevention initiative that's Calgary-wide, sort of system-wide. So they want to bring together stakeholders from health, from social services, from education, and create some sort of initiative that they're seeing that could have long-term impacts on child and youth well-being. So the outcome of our work is to really make recommendations for what the scope of that project could be. So what particular issue might be the best one to start with for the Calgary context? Is there something that, based on where there's lots of energy or activity happening in Calgary for child and youth well-being, could build on that, or filling a gap that that is really important and has, like, there's a lot of needs that aren't being met. So very briefly, there's a 3 kind of stages to the project. We're just in the initiation phase, which is essentially working with United Way to say, hey, here's our detailed work plan. Does that work for you? What else do you need? How do we need to shape this together? And then we'll move on to the needs assessment. So that's really where most, like, a lot of the research activity will be happening. So we'll be doing like a lit review of the needs and the gaps in the area of child and youth well-being, and then pairing that with interviews with local stakeholders so they can contextualize for us, like, what the literature is saying this, we have this research, but what does that mean for Calgary, and what fits, what doesn't, what other needs are there that aren't included in what we've come up with so far. And then after that, we're going to hold a larger scale stakeholder engagement event. So we're going to do one event with youth only, and then one with, like, stakeholders, again, across health and education, to bring to them, like, hey, here's our beginning findings of what we think would be a really great project for Calgary and to improve child well-being. And then work with those larger groups, 30, 40, 50 people, to assess where we've gotten to with our findings, what's missing, what else we need to think of, and have them help us, work towards a consensus on what might be an exciting project for Calgary, and hopefully one that those stakeholders would want to be involved in making a reality as well. Yeah, so we'll put all of that stuff together then into a final report that has our key findings and then our suggestion for, hey, if you're going to do a long-term prevention initiative, here's where we think you could focus. Here's who needs to be involved. Here's how maybe the next few steps you could take to get that work underway. So I see our role in this, like, doing this project, is really helping them to set the stage, hopefully for something quite exciting and maybe like a changing at a system level. Yeah, so thank you. That's the end of my slides, but I'd be very happy to take questions or comments. I've put my email address here. If anyone wants to connect with me afterwards, please feel free. I'd love talking about career development. So feel free to get in touch with me. And I think, Maria, I'll stop sharing my slides now, and then can open it up to questions.
All right. Thank you so much, Jen. This was very informative and quite well aligned with the different questions and pursuits that we have had during this particular semester with my students in my course. And I was even quite impressed by the fact that you're talking about well-being, and one of our research teams just finished presenting on the project, their research, where they were saying that well-being is a complex concept and how do you operationalize that. So maybe you can say something about that a little bit later, but I don't want to usurp the right to ask questions. I'll indeed invite the audience to please, students and all other actually attendees, please go ahead and ask questions. If you want to put your names in the chat, that could help build a sequence of questions. But for now, anyone who wants to ask, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
I have a question. So Jen, if you are working like with vulnerable groups with children, and you were doing the assessments, how do you get about doing that? Like, do you interview them, or do you interview the children? Do you have to have permission from the parents? How does that work?
Sure. It would, yeah, we'd always get permission from parents if we're going to talk to children, for sure, just sort of part of that research ethics process. We haven't done a lot of work with younger children, but when we have, we've tried to even set it up as doing like play opportunities. So we've done some work with children's services where we could set up, kids have an opportunity to come and, you know, play with toys and do things, and then the care workers that work with them ask them a few questions about the things that we're interested in. So kind of having people they trust be with them when we're doing that kind of process. I haven't personally done any work with like under high school age kids. And then high school age, I did work at United Way. I worked on a project where we worked with a lot of high schools in Calgary, I think 20 high schools in Calgary. And we found that offering pizza and drinks was the way to get youth to come. I think that's the same in university. I still show up for events where there's free food and drinks, but really trying to meet them where they're at. So it's sometimes better not to set up like you are going to come to a focus group and talk to us about what it's like to be a youth. But maybe if they hang out at a community center, it could just be a quick interaction like, hey, what do you like being at the community center? What do you really like about being here? That kind of thing. So trying to kind of map it out that way in terms of if I'm the child or youth who's going to participate in this, like what would be useful from my end too, like what can I get something out of this, as opposed to us just as researchers coming to extract information. Yeah, thanks for the question.
Okay, Taylor.
Hello. So as Marie was kind of saying, I was a part of the research group in her senior seminar class that's talking about well-being, and you kind of addressed that in the United Way project that you're working on. We ran into a bit of a snag where we found that like well-being was really subjective and means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and
Yeah.
so we felt that in the end of our research, we weren't necessarily able to touch on like the full concept of well-being. So how are you like measuring what well-being means, and yeah, like how, like what's your unit of measurement, and like how are you comparing somebody's well-being to like the community's well-being, I guess?
That is the question I'm tackling right now because we're literally in week 1 of this project. So I think what we've done some previous work at Policywise where we had a project that was specifically focused on what are the domains of well-being out there kind of in the literature. So I think we collected, I want to say like 100 different documents. Like it was quite a long project. And then synthesized what we were finding there in terms of like what are the common domain areas in well-being that they were seeing, what did they see most often or least often. So I'm planning to use that kind of document as a starting point. But then, so it's things like there's like a safety, like keeping like safe from harm kind of domains there. I try to remember, I haven't looked at it yet, but connection to culture, I think was a really important thing, educational opportunities. And there are some well-known, like I know UNICEF has a really well-known well-being domain kind of document as well. So really, I want to go back to that document that another team has produced and then look at how do I translate that to Calgary context, and then kind of use our stakeholder interviews to sort of get a sense of those domains, which ones seem most relevant, or where is there most need, or what is best, which of those domains seem to be the best satisfied, for lack of a better term. Yeah. Is that helpful? Yeah.
Yeah, it remains a very complex concept. And I think there is always an added complication to concepts like this because you can approach it from the position of the person, her or himself, the feeling of well-being and how they consider or evaluate their own well-being versus well-being from some sort of objective criteria like the UN does or UNICEF in your case, right? Which has, if a community or a person has this and that, so okay, their well-being is high. All right, but as that person, and that person may not feel that their well-being is at a very high level. So you, as a researcher, you have to decide which side you approach this from, and also to state that, I suppose, in your research, right, Jen?
Definitely. Yeah, there's definitely a subjective nature to well-being as well. And also in the case of the United Way project, individual perspectives on what area of well-being they would like to improve too. So, different people have different things that they would prefer to work on as well. So I think that's partly why we're engaging with youth and families as part of that project too, is to sort of get a sense, okay, like we'll tell them kind of like, here's the things that the literature says, what does that mean to you? Or what do you care most about that? Or if you could change something for, the environment of your child, what would that look like? And I think I didn't actually respond to Taylor's comment about there's also community well-being and individual well-being too. And we're early enough in the project that I haven't worked out with United Way, like, are they more interested in those sort of community well-being indicators or individual, and how that will, like, whether we might be looking at both or focusing in on one over the other. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. Those are the intricacies of every concept that is worth researching, I suppose. So
Yeah, and I think
strategies.
a lot of it's interesting how much just defining a concept, even when like if in some of our evaluations it's just saying, here's what we think your the outcome of your project might be, like this is where we think you're going towards. Even just being able to be someone who can make those comments, and then the people doing the project are like, oh, well, actually, that's not where we wanted to go, but you're right, that's maybe where we're heading. Let's define a different kind of goal. And conceptually, yeah, I think I don't know why I'm consistently surprised, but every project I start and then think, oh, I know what this concept means. It's like, it's easy, but then the importance of actually interrogating it and understanding what you mean by it so that you can kind of figure out what research you want to do about it. It's such an important step. And your understanding of it needs to be the same as all of the stakeholder groups you might be working with, or at least you have to understand each other's views on it.
And in that sense, I feel in my own research, and I don't know how it is about you, that with every new topic I start or any issue that I get interested in researching, there is a whole bulk of literature to go through in order to clarify. So yeah, I do know my media stuff, right? But when you turn to, like, I have two civic social movements or citizen engagement, or the home environment, and how people use media in home environment, you always find a whole pile of literature that deals with the specific domain or concept, as you say, that you want to implement in your research. So you start your education often from scratch in one of these areas. I don't know, my impression from the projects that you talked about is that you have needed to do a lot of that as well.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. Where possible, and if it's in the funding that we're receiving to do the project, we always like to start with kind of an environmental scan and kind of that, which is essentially really understanding what evidence there is out there, and then how are people defining things, and what have they done with those concepts. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much, Jen. Andrea.
So the two of you were addressing exactly what I was thinking about, which was with regard to developmental evaluation. Jen, I was just involved in a project through Simon Fraser University where I was asked to do a developmental evaluation, and it was a methodology I had never encountered. And so it was something I had to learn about and then implement. And it was very useful in the context I was doing it in. But that was kind of my question is, as a researcher, so someone coming out of university, you can't be expected to have all these tools in your back pocket to be able to use. So do you as a group do kind of a training, or is it an individual sort of initiative where you're like, now I got to brush up on or read up on developmental evaluation? That's the first question. The second question is, how is that going? I mean, it seems like you're evaluating a project that's brand new as it's developing. So I'm a bit curious about that, because I was under the impression that the project would already be developed at least somewhat. So yeah, I'm just a little bit interested in how your how that development evaluation is happening.
Sure. Okay. So in terms of your first question about people not being expected to have the skills, or you're coming out of school and you don't have the skills. You can be 20 years out of school like me and still get assigned a project where you might not have all the skills too. So I would say for me, I didn't have much experience with developmental evaluation before starting this project. And so I had to do a lot of just reading myself and talk to some colleagues who had done the work. And then there's always that kind of learn as you go as well. And you wouldn't have noticed on my slide, but I believe I said developmental evaluation approach or developmental approach, because it's not a full-on developmental evaluation, because that would mean I would need to be fully embedded with that team at all their meetings. It's a very time-intensive approach if you're going to do it 100% to how it's been described. But so our developmental approach is that we're trying to use as many techniques as possible. So the quick iterations of learning and returning analysis to the team, and then attending some of their team meetings. Like I would say they would call me part of the team even though I'm not there all the time, so that we have that kind of collegial relationship and just get to be more just talking about issues and what's going on beyond the like official, here's our interview to collect information from you kind of thing. It becomes a little bit more informal than that. So anyways, all that said is that we try to, as a team, have the research skills across as many types of research and approaches as possible. And then, you know, we set each of our projects up collaboratively. So there's multiple people on each project because we think that adds some rigor to it as well. So to have somebody on the team who has some experience, and then they can kind of lead the other people on the team in the method or whatever it looks like. And then everybody kind of gains that capacity. I think that's actually one of the strengths of the organization, is that we're building that in-house capacity with every project that we do as well. So just expanding our research toolbox. And as to where the project is at in terms of the rural mental health one, they spent the first year, I think, as I said, really developing their training and refining it, and just version 2.0, 3.0. So they've really honed that training, and I think we were quite instrumental in sort of letting them know what concepts worked really well, what they needed to explain differently, what should even not be part of the training, or what else people need to know to prepare them to be on the ground. And then this year with COVID, we kind of had to switch evaluation tacks a bit, because we had finished with the training, but they had to bring the training online. So we ended up doing kind of a similar process with, okay, how do you actually take what you've been teaching in person and put it online? And so now, after 6 months, I think they've gotten to a good place with that. And then I think otherwise, we've been really supporting them with, we've defined kind of different functions that the network has to fulfill in order for it to be successful. So they have to build a network identity. They have to facilitate interactions between people. They have to manage conflict. There's a whole bunch of them. So, but we've kind of set up a framework for the team so they could think about what they're doing and how they can meet all of these needs of the network development. So we're out there right now talking with animators to say, like, you're a part of this network. How is it, like, getting a sense of, is all this work worthwhile? What's still missing from the network? What else do they need to do? But we help them sort of devise, you know, maybe having virtual book clubs, or you should have webinars on these particular topics, like sort of that kind of level of thing. And where we're still needing to work with them more is now around, you've got all these great ideas, people are starting to engage with each other. How do you make it stick? How do you actually make this network something? And I don't, that'll be next year's work. We don't really know what that's going to look like yet. But it would be a shame to put in all this time and effort and not make sure that it has some level of sustainability. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. I would love to talk a long time about this and just sort of have an exchange of our experiences, because yeah, it's an interesting and an important way of engaging with you know, of doing community work is and a different way of doing evaluation, which I think suits sort of community work better than the kind of academic evaluation that we're trained to do. It's more removed and impartial, and, you know, maybe makes your client feel more like they're under the microscope, and that's not a good thing in this case. So yeah.
And I would say, just as a general message, I didn't even think about talking about this, but it's certainly the general reaction if I'm doing an evaluation and I want to talk to people who are part of a project, there is a general sense, oh, you're here to judge me, even if it's just like someone who's in a training and we wanted to talk about them, like how it went. That's a big barrier, I find, in terms of how do you kind of make people, because from my approach personally, it's all about learning. How can we do this better? Like, it's not a like, oh, I'm going to critique you and here's all the things you did wrong, but it's like, hey, like, here's what's going well. Let's have more of that. Here's what's not going so well. How do we change that? So I kind of have it as my mission now to sort of change how people view evaluation to, like kind of, but it can interfere with your data collection for sure. Yeah.
Okay. Well, hey, we should have a virtual coffee and talk about
it. Let's do that. Definitely. It's my favorite project, as you can probably tell. Like, I do really enjoy talking about it. So yeah, for sure.
Okay. Sounds good.
Jen, a couple of things that came to mind, and probably students are wondering about too. So I'll try to take that perspective. I noticed that when you were talking about those jobs, you said that even at the entry level, you require people to have 1-2 years of experience. And as a mother and as a professor, I've always wondered, what do these people out in the different companies and industries expect? Where would students get this first 1-2 years experience if nobody's willing to hire them with zero experience? So I know that there are hardly any people with zero experience in what they want to pursue, but still, where do people get, and what do you count as experience when you look at candidates?
Sure. And I maybe should have put started at 0 years experience, because we have hired people directly out of their academic programs, but it's just not generally what we do. I think we're usually able to kind of have a pick of a few people, so we like to kind of have a little bit of professional work experience, so they just know what a workplace is like and how to navigate that. But we also have luck. We've had a lot of luck with practicum students. So I don't know if that's still a possibility for the people in this particular class, but having an opportunity to do a practicum in a work environment and kind of have practice at that. We've had practicum students come in, and I think we've hired at least 3 or 4 of them out of maybe the 8 or 10 that we had over the past 4 years, something like that. So that's been one way into working with us as well.
And those practicum students, have they been undergraduate or masters, or what level?
Both.
Both.
Mostly masters, but some undergrad.
Is it at all thinkable for for an undergraduate student to be somehow embedded in your projects for the purposes of their project, not necessarily as masters, but like a course project or an honors project? Has that ever happened?
Not at the undergrad level, but I think and even at the master's level, they're working on our work rather than kind of doing their work and kind of being embedded with us. But
Yeah.
we've actually just hired on, it's for a temporary contract, but we had a community health student undergrad from U of C, and she was so amazing that we've hired her on, and we've called it a research assistant role. So it's kind of even like before research and evaluation associate. It's like, come work with us, do more of like transcription of interviews and scheduling of, meetings and stuff like that, some of that more administrative stuff, but be in the environment, the research environment, so you can kind of get a sense of what it actually works like and looks like.
Are your practicums paid or unpaid?
Unpaid, I think. Yeah, unpaid.
Mm-hmm.
It's
There
usually
are
they have to do it as part of their course requirement. Yeah.
I see. I see. This is the co-op type of thing where they get
Yes.
some credit or something like that. Yeah, well, we should certainly look into things like that for our students. Well, maybe if anybody in the class has another question, please do it now, because our time is almost up. But in our previous conversation with Jason from the city of Calgary, we talked a lot about qualitative versus quantitative research. And I wanted to ask you too, which kind of research do you find you do more of? And what are the benefits basically of each of these kinds from your perspective?
That's a big question.
I know, but if you can just roughly
Sure.
tell
Yeah.
us about the ratio and the benefits.
At our organization, I'd say overall, it might be a pretty even mix between quantitative and qualitative. But for myself personally, the projects I'm on tend to be more qualitatively focused. So because that's my background. And the value, I think, of the qualitative research, a lot of the projects that we're doing and questions that we're asking are really trying to understand how or why something works the way that it does. And so being able to ask more open-ended questions and explore with people their experiences or what their project is like lends itself to a more qualitative approach, so that, you know, once you've kind of collected all your information, you can be much more open to surprises, or like what people are talking about, what emerges, the themes that emerge from their experience is what you're talking about. Where I think often with the quantitative studies, they definitely have their place, but in the kind of work I do, they can be helpful, but they're very structured. So you've predetermined kind of the information that you want to get back. And so there's less opportunity for kind of that exploration, or the how is this working? Why is this working? What's important to the people I'm talking to aspect of things, I would say. But on the quantitative side, our data team works a lot with government departments, trying to consolidate like a lot of different sources of data that maybe it falls under children's services. What's all the data that, you know, that department collects, and trying to help them either link them together or understand like how you can join them together to make meaning of what's happening at that larger scale. So sort of trends within Alberta kind of thing over time. They're definitely better placed to look at that kind of information, whereas the qualitative side is maybe better placed to do developmental evaluation, like Andrea and I were talking about, and sort of being open to changing directions and exploring different avenues. Yeah, feel free to ask me follow-up questions. I'm not sure if I completely covered it.
No, you know about where my question is coming from, because qualitative research has traditionally, typically in scientific fields that consider themselves rigorous science, has been undervalued and doesn't have very good press, but that's changing, and we see how that's changing in presentations like yours. I wonder whether your clients are open to, because it's one thing for us researchers to understand because we bathe in this sort of debates and literature and so on, but how about the clients, the people who say, I want my value out of this, you know, I want to get something positive that I show whoever, and yeah, move on.
Yeah. It's definitely the predominant view is more a preference for quantitative, more definitive kind of findings, I would say. But I would mark our success on that qualitative end of things is that we tend to have a lot of repeat sponsors or funders that work with us, that if we can do some work for you and kind of show what the qualitative analysis can do and how it can kind of unearth different ideas and themes, then that kind of sells them on it and they might come back and work with us again. So we kind of rely on word of mouth and repeat business in that way, I would say. And by that same token though, I do feel very fortunate that I get to do a full-time job that's very qualitatively analysis focused, because it's not necessarily a lot of jobs available all the time. Like you have to kind of find your niche and sort of look for opportunities. It's not as easy just to kind of go out there and find a job right away.
Yeah, but those jobs do exist, as
They do,
your
yes,
example
they definitely do. Yeah.
demonstrates. All right. Well, thanks so much, Jen. I'm turning once again to the class. If anybody had a last minute urge to ask a question, because I see no names in the participants in the chat, but if anyone has anything to ask about, do it now or you'll miss your chance. Okay, there's no response. I suppose the class is too shy, or maybe what you have presented has been comprehensive enough.
But feel free to share my email again, Maria, if you'd like, and if anyone does want to get in touch, I'm open to that.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jen. This has been a pleasure to hear you talk.
Thank you. Yeah, it was great to
And
be
I
here.
hope that we can develop more of a working relationship with your organization and with your projects. So probably if you gave me some materials that I can spread around my classes and encourage students to look for ways to get involved, and we could work out something like practicums, or why not communication students, right? If you have students from other social science areas, why not communication
Yep.
students too? So we could certainly look into that between our program and your organization, because you could be a great bridge, I suppose, network
Definitely.
bridge.
Great. Yeah, for sure. Let's keep talking. Yeah.
Thank you again. Thank you, Andrea, for helping organize this. Andrea is
Pleasure. Thank
instrumental.
you. Thanks so much, Jen. Very interesting.
Great. All right. Take care.
Okay, bye.
Okay.
And thank you, students, for being here.